their day with about 2 hours of general speeches before turning to a judicial nomination of President Obama's. He nominated John Gerrard, a Nebraska Supreme Court judge, for a federal judgeship in Nebraska, and senators will vote at 5:30 Eastern.
Let us pray. Eternal Lord God, the source of wisdom and might, with renewed powers and refreshed spirits, we return to this national chamber of deliberation. We begin our work with the awareness that without you, nothing of significance can be accomplished. Be the guardian and guide of our senators as they travel the unbeaten path into our national future. Grant them wisdom and courage for the living of these days. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., January 23, 2012. To the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I first of all welcome everyone back after the long break that we had. I hope it was restful and productive for everyone. We have, as happens every 4 years, we have a presidential election year, and as a result of that, things should be more tense than usual, but I certainly hope not. Mr. President, there are two bills at the desk due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the titles of the bill for a second time.
H.R. 440, an act to provide for the establishment of the Special Envoy to promote religious freedom of religious minorities in the Near East and South Central Asia. H.R. 3012, an act to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act to eliminate the per-country numerical limitation and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I object to further proceedings in regard to these two bills.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President, the Senate will be in morning business till 4 o'clock today.
The bills will be placed on the calendar.
Oh, yes. I'm so sorry. I do that all the time. Apologize. Mr. President, the senators be permitted to speak up for 10 minutes each until 4 o'clock today. Following that morning business, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider a nomination of John Gerrard to be a United States District Judge for the District of Nebraska. At 5:30, we will vote on confirmation of that matter. I ask unanimous consent that the cloture motion with respect to the motion to proceed to calendar number 70, S968, be vitiated.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, I was saddened to hear that Senator Mark Kirk suffered a stroke over the weekend. He had surgery this morning. I followed it as closely as I have been able to. And the doctors say that he'll recover, and I'm confident that's true. He's young and in very good health. And I wish him a full and speedy recovery and look forward to his returning to his work here in the Senate as soon as possible. Mr. President, Winston Churchill said, and I quote, "Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen." That's what Winston Churchill said. I know each of my colleagues here in the Senate, regardless of political party, has the courage to stand up and speak in defense of his or her principles. This year, I hope we each find the courage and faith to listen and cooperate as well. The founders, in their wisdom when drafting our Constitution, created a divided government. That's what they did with this bicameral legislature that they envisioned. They also looked to see a robust debate on important issues. I don't believe they envisioned the obstructionism and gridlock that ground the work of the Congress to a halt last year. Influenced by these Tea Party voices, Republicans forced us to waste months on routine legislation. They nearly shut down our government, and they held hostage the full faith and credit of the United States. So I remind my Republican colleagues that not every discussion, every matter that we deal with, should collapse into a fight. We don't have to fight about everything. Every piece of legislation we consider should not result in a political battle. When we work together, we achieve greater results for the American people. That's why this year Democrats and Republicans must seek common ground. We must also admit it when we find that common ground and work on that common ground that we've discovered. We should all be able to agree on this. Congress must do whatever it takes to help create jobs and strengthen our economy. Democrats believe it will take common sense policies that protect the middle class and smart investments to rebuild our roads, bridges, schools, our water systems, our sewer systems. We must combat income inequality now, or the rich will keep getting richer and the poor getting poorer while the middle class disappears. That's not fiction, it's fact. Mr. President, I watched on public television just within the past week or so a wonderful piece by Bill Moyer's Journal. I was so impressed with that I called and spoke to him afterwards. And I'm not in the habit of calling people like that very often. But over the years, we've spoken a couple times, 3 or 4 times probably over the many years I've been here. The reason I was so impressed with what he said, it reminded me, I think, of what a lot of people should be reminded. He talked about going to a public elementary school. He talked about going to a public high school, a state-supported university. And during all this time of going to libraries, public libraries, we have to understand, Mr. President, that government has been so helpful to most of us, and we can't turn away from the institutions of government which have been so important to us over the years. So I repeat, we must combat income inequality and combat it now, or the rich will keep getting richer, the poor getting poorer, and the middle class being squeezed all the more. I repeat, that's not fiction, it's a fact. So we, Democrats, will continue to defend working Americans, and we hope Republicans will join us in that regard. But if they allow the Tea Party to turn every issue into an all or nothing battle, we can't back down, we shouldn't back down, and we'll always side with the middle class. We saw the results of Republican brinkmanship in December. Now, Mr. President, I was on I won't talk about TV shows, but as soon as we had the vote here, I walked up to the press gallery as I was requested to do, and I complimented publicly my Republican colleague, Senator McConnell, and I was happy that it did get some press. Senator McConnell and I made an arrangement here to complete this legislation, and he stuck by that. I know he had tremendous pressure, and cannot understand all the pressure that he did have, but I admire and appreciate what he did in sticking with what the Senate did. So, Mr. President, we then refused to give up on a tax cut for hardworking families, and it turned out really well because the members of Congress came to the realization that the American people said they couldn't afford a $1,000 tax hike. Putting money back in the pockets of 160 million American workers shouldn't have been so difficult. It shouldn't have been a fight in the first place. I hope we all learned a lesson from this battle. So it's time for us to stop fighting. I repeat, Mr. President, we don't have to fight about everything. There comes a time, and the time is now, when we need to have the courage to stand up and fight for things that are right. This year will be just as important when we summon the courage to sit down and listen rather than stand up and fighting. We need to sit down and listen more often. the Republican leader and I, we deal with a lot of issues that come up in the Senate here, and some of them are difficult. But the one thing we always have kind of, it's a diversion for us, is we follow our college athletics in our respective states. And I've been very fortunate in Nevada to have the University of Nevada have a very good football team the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. I won't talk about UNLV's football team. It's not worth doing, as I've told the university president. But we also have in Nevada, and this is always the way it is in Kentucky, they always have good basketball teams. But we've been doing very well in recent years, especially at UNLV. And now UNR has, I believe, the longest winning record in Division I basketball. They've only lost 3 games. UNLV's only lost 3 games. So we have fun in our own few minutes together talking about basketball. I've never seen a more avid fan of University of Louisville. He, of course, follows University of Kentucky, which is easy to follow because their teams are always so good. But so is Louisville's team. And Louisville and UNLV have had in recent years some very, very tight basketball battles. So, Mr. President, I just want you and everyone else to know that Senator McConnell and I do, on occasion, divert from business to the Senate.
Mr. President, I would just add that
The Republican leader.
We do enjoy our sports discussions. Of course, I always have the ultimate trump, which is the University of Kentucky's won 7 NCAA championships, the University of Louisville 2, and so my friend is always trying to catch up. And I would say that
Only 8 more to go.
Only 8 more to go. UNLV has a good team this year. Probably not as good as Kentucky, maybe as good as Louisville, but it does give us an opportunity to catch up on each other's teams every day as we head to the floor. Mr. President, let me just start on a sort of sober note by saying we're all thinking of our colleague Mark Kirk. It's at moments like these that we're all reminded of how fragile life is and that there are far more important things in life than politics. So we send Mark and his family our prayers and our wishes for a speedy recovery. Now I'd like to begin my remarks today by simply stating the obvious. The jobs crisis we're in continues for millions of Americans. Many millions more are worried about the future. And Republicans are quite eager to work with the Democratic majority here in the Senate to jumpstart our economy and set our nation on an entirely different course than the one we've been on the last few years. Let's be clear, the reason our economy has gotten worse and our future more uncertain has nothing to do with what Republicans in Congress won't do at some point in the future, and everything to do with what this president has already done. Americans are looking for an entirely new direction. It's one that focuses on growing the economy, not growing our nation's debt. So we're happy to work with the Democratic majority in the Senate to achieve these goals. But based on some of the news stories I've read over the last few weeks, it doesn't appear that they're all that interested. Based on what I've read, it appears Democratic leaders right here in the Senate have gotten together with the White House and mapped out a plan to actually guarantee gridlock for the rest of the year. Now, this is a sort of stunningly cynical strategy when you think about it. Millions of Americans can't find work. The average length of unemployment is the longest it has ever been. Hundreds of thousands of Americans who had a job when this president took office have simply dropped out of the workforce. And yet the Washington Democrat plan for this year is to sit on their hands and blame it on the other guy. Now, I certainly hope that this was just a couple of overzealous staffers saying this. I hope our Democratic friends haven't really decided that this is how they plan to spend the rest of this year. I hope they haven't given up on governing in favor of campaigning and complaining. Because, to borrow a phrase, facing up to the economic crisis we face can't wait. Democrats in Congress can't simply throw in the towel because they're no longer getting everything they want. I mean, the fact is, Mr. President, Democrats got everything they wanted for 2 years, after this president was elected. The American people decided to impose a little balance in the November 2010 election. And they're still waiting for this White House and Democratic leaders in Congress to work on a different approach. So it's about time we got started. President Obama's 3-year experiment with big government has made our economy worse and our future more uncertain. Americans want a government that is simpler, streamlined, and secure. But we won't be able to achieve these things if Democrats refuse to even try, if they've decided to spend the next year on show votes and legislation that's designed for bus tours instead of bill signings. The number one issue facing our country is jobs. And the number one goal of Republicans in 2012 is to continue to make it easier for American small business to create jobs. We will accomplish this by focusing on 3 things: fundamental tax reform, regulatory reform, and energy security. But we'll surely fail if the Democratic majority here in the Senate refuses to help. So Republicans will continue to make the case for policies that will spark an economic revival and create new opportunities for struggling Americans. And we hope the Democrats will join us. Tomorrow, the President will come to the Capitol to tell us what he thinks about the state of our country and to outline his plans for the future. We welcome him. We look forward to his address. We stand ready to work with him, as always, on an agenda that will get our nation moving again. Not an agenda to divide, not a repackaging of the same ideas that have made our economy worse and our future more uncertain, but a truly bipartisan agenda that gets us beyond past skirmishes and onto a different path entirely. There's much we can and should do together. Let's focus on that and put the rest aside.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, there will now be a period of morning business until 4 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes. The senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak on behalf of an outstanding Nebraskan, State Supreme Court Justice John Gerrard. His nomination to fill a vacancy on the United States District Court for Nebraska is now before the Senate. John Gerrard has built an exceptional record in private practice and on the Nebraska Supreme Court, and will do an exemplary job as a U.S. District Judge for the District of Nebraska. I've known him for more than 20 years and believe he has the experience, the intellect, and the temperament needed on our federal bench. I can't think of anyone better qualified than John Gerrard. I was very pleased the President nominated him. I've welcomed my colleague, Senator Joanne Strong's support, and I believe the Senate should confirm him for the position of a U.S. District Court Judge. Gerrard, a native of Schuyler, Nebraska, has served as a private attorney, a city attorney, counsel to several public schools districts in Nebraska, and he has an outstanding public record as a judge. In private practice, Judge Gerrard tried dozens of cases, both civil and criminal, to verdict in state and federal courts. He was highly respected as a trial attorney, earning an A.V. Martindale-Hubbell rating from his colleagues, and he was elected to the American Board of Trial Advocates by his peers. During my tenure as governor, I appointed him in 1995 to the Nebraska Supreme Court. Nebraska voters have shown their confidence in him by retaining him in office 3 times, in 1998, 2004, and 2010. He's consistently received top ratings by the Nebraska State Bar Association in its biennial judicial evaluations. particularly in the areas of legal analysis, judicial temperament, and fair treatment of litigants and their lawyers. Furthermore, the Nebraska judicial system gave him its Distinguished Judge for Improvement of Judicial System Award in 2006. This was in recognition of his work as co-chair of the system's Minority Justice Committee and the Interpreter Advisory Committee, as well as leading initiatives promoting racial and ethnic fairness under the law. Also in 2008, the Nebraska State Bar Foundation gave him its Legal Pioneer Award. This was for making the courts more user-friendly for citizens from all cultures by utilizing technology and other means to improve both understanding and participation in the courts. I'd note that on the Nebraska Supreme Court, Judge Gerrard has authored more than 450 opinions, and he is widely considered a leader on that court. Judge Gerrard is held in the highest regard by both the bench and the bar in Nebraska, and the American Bar Association has deemed him, quote, unanimously well qualified to serve as a U.S. District Judge. Judge Gerrard maintains the same even temperament off the bench as he does on the bench. Clearly, he's an exemplary person who has contributed much to our society. Furthermore, he and his wife Nancy have been married for 34 years and have raised 4 exceptional children. I'd also note that during my years as governor, I appointed 81 judges in the state of Nebraska, including the entire Nebraska State Supreme Court. Since I've been in the Senate, I voted on numerous judicial nominees. In all cases, I've supported candidates for the judiciary who convinced me they would follow the law and would not manipulate it to promote a personal or activist agenda. This is a critical test for me, and it's relevant concerning Justice Gerrard. I am convinced he would not allow personal beliefs to interfere with his judicial duties, nor would he bring an activist agenda to the federal bench. He has proven this, beyond a doubt, with his disciplined approach to the law over the last 16.5 years as a judge on the Nebraska Supreme Court. Questions, however, have been raised to Justice Gerrard on these points, and I'd like to address them now. He's been asked whether a matter may be constitutional one day and not the next, based on a changing legal landscape. He's answered for the record that the U.S. Supreme Court and the Circuit Court sets the binding precedent on whether a matter is constitutional, which he would follow as a district judge. And he stated that a federal district court judge can conclude that the law has changed only by legislation or by a ruling by a higher court. Justice Gerrard has a clear understanding of the limitations of a federal district court judge. He has demonstrated that understanding in the deference he has given to the legislative branch and to higher court precedent during his years on the Nebraska Supreme Court. He's also been asked specifically whether he has personal beliefs that would make him unable to carry out the death penalty. Again, he's answered for the record that he does not. And more to the point, Nebraska carried out the death penalty while I was governor and Justice Gerrard was serving on the Nebraska Supreme Court. As a matter of fact, the court has concurred in establishing an execution date to take place this March 6th in the state of Nebraska. Now, issuing and executing a death sentence is one of the most solemn responsibility that the judicial and executive branches are entrusted with. In every instance, Justice Gerrard has ruled on the death penalty. He has been balanced, even-handed, and most important, faithful to the Constitution. In fact, Judge Gerrard has confirmed for the record that the U.S. Supreme Court and the Nebraska Supreme Court have repeatedly held that the death penalty is an acceptable punishment as long as the laws for imposing it are followed and the constitutional limitations imposed by the U.S. Supreme Court are respected. Finally, Judge Gerrard has stated, and the record shows, that he's voted to confirm a number of sentences and convictions of those sentenced to death, and he has authored more than one state court opinion upholding the constitutionality of Nebraska's death penalty law. In my view, Judge Gerrard's answers in his clear record more than adequately address any concerns about his ability or willingness to both apply the law with impartiality and to carry out the law effectively. To sum up, John Gerrard deserves to be confirmed by the United States Senate because he has an outstanding legal record, he possesses the proper temperament needed on the federal bench, and he will follow legal precedent to carry out the law rather than interpret as he sees it. He has been and will be an impartial judge, not an activist. So I urge his confirmation by my colleagues, and with that, I yield the floor. And note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Turn the finger.
The Senate's in a quorum call now, and they're going to be considering a judicial nomination later today. President Obama nominated John Gerrard. He's a Nebraska Supreme Court judge for a federal judgeship in Nebraska. And senators will be voting on that nomination at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, a little news update. Doctors say a stroke suffered by Illinois Republican Senator Mark Kirk has affected his left arm and leg. They say part of his skull was removed today to alleviate pressure in his brain. He's in intensive care in a Chicago hospital, but doctors say that they are happy with how he's doing. And again, that is the Illinois Republican Senator Mark Kirk suffering a stroke.
starting in a little more than 50 minutes from now at 4 o'clock Eastern. We expect a debate here in the Senate on John Gerrard. President Obama nominated him to be a Nebraska Supreme Court judge for a federal judgeship in Nebraska. Senators will then vote on his nomination at 5:30 Eastern Time. The National Journal writes that the White House will release its budget a week late, happening on Monday, February 13th. Originally, it had been scheduled for release on February 6th, and when asked about the delay, the official wrote in an email, quote, "As in previous years, the date was determined based on the need to finalize decisions and technical details of the document." That's in the National Journal. A March for Life rally is happening in Washington, D.C. today. Participants are marching from the National Mall to the Supreme Court. We've been seeing some tweets here on our Twitter page here about that happening today. A couple of Republican presidential candidates have released statements about that rally. Newt Gingrich, who won the South Carolina primary on Saturday, saying, "Thank you for bearing witness today to the incomparable dignity of every human life, born and unborn." And a statement from Mitt Romney, "All of them are marching today in the spirit of compassion and mercy, and I share their commitment to laws that protect the innocent and uphold a culture of life." There'll be a vigil at the Supreme Court starting at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, which we're covering, and we'll bring it to you later in our schedule. As we wait here in the Senate for a member to come to the floor to speak, starting at about 4 p.m. Eastern Time, we expect some debate in the Senate on the nomination of John Gerrard for a federal judgeship in Nebraska. And then senators expected to vote on that nomination at around 5:30 Eastern Time. Later on tonight, here on C-SPAN 2 in prime time, chief executives from around the country look at the year ahead, beginning with New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll also have the inaugural address of Mississippi's new governor, Phil Bryant, and California Governor Jerry Brown.
Thank you.